Welcome to the Association 100 podcast. The A100 podcast is an extension of our Association 100 bi-monthly newsletter that focuses on best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies and tactics that work in the world of associations. The podcast will feature meaningful conversations with association professionals across the country, taking a deeper dive into trending topics, offering insights that both inform and inspire. Welcome back to the A100 podcast. I'm Colleen Gallagher, and today I'm so excited to have Steve Minster, President and CEO of the Council on Responsible Nutrition, on the podcast with us. Steve brings decades of industry knowledge to his role, just as CRN is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. So we're really excited to tap into his insights and appreciate you joining us on the podcast today, Steve.
Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's set the stage for some of our listeners. Tell me a bit more about CRN, who you are, and your mission.
Well, CRN is the Council for Responsible Nutrition. That's our full name. We are the trade association for the dietary supplement industry, which really encompasses a very broad market segment. It's everything from your multivitamins, fish oils and omega-3s, probiotics, herbal supplements, all of the sports nutrition products, and with protein and things like that. So it's a pretty big industry, about $58 billion a year now.
Wow. That's great. So what are some of your top priorities and how do you show your members value?
Sure. The dietary supplement industry has sort of a unique history and culture and relationship with our regulators. And so one of the really important things for us at CRN is, we say our mantra is responsible is our middle name, but we try to live that out. So we have a number of voluntary programs, guidelines, best practices that our members develop and then adopt and then live by. And I think that's always been a hallmark of CRN, is that we are the responsible industry. Our members are trying to do what's right for the consumer. They're putting safety and science up front and as their first priority, and then they're willing to go even above and beyond what's legally required. And that's the interesting thing about voluntary guidelines. You can, as a trade association, you can bring an industry together and get them to adopt standards that maybe no company on their own would feel comfortable doing, because they don't want to be the only one out there that's setting their guardrails around them if everybody else is going to go off and do something else. But as an association, you can bring all of your industry leaders together and they can develop a best practice, and then everybody agrees to implement it. And we've had several success stories over the years of where we've done things and actually gotten ahead of an issue, which later then, maybe there was class action litigation against other parts of the industry on that issue. But we can say, well, the responsible members of CRN, we got ahead of that and we're doing the right thing. So I think that's a big piece of what we do at CRN.
Yeah, I love that. And that's such a great point you make about having associations help lead industry first rather than waiting for government regulations. It's a great role that you can play to have industry-led innovation and regulations and things like that, rather than having rules come down to control.
And people really think about associations as the ability to bring members together for advocacy. And we certainly do that. We have a very strong presence on Capitol Hill and with the federal FDA and out in the states. But we can also act to bring companies together to, do the right thing. It's not just necessarily looking externally on how we can be the advocate for the industry, but how we can, pull the industry along by its own bootstraps to be sure that we're always putting our consumer first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so talking about your membership in your association, you guys have a huge milestone this year with 50 years. I mean, that's incredible. So congratulations to your association for that. But tell me, what does this mean for your members, for your association?
Well, as when we look back and think about where the industry was in 1973 and where we are today, as I said, we're now around $58 billion a year. So a far cry from where this industry was back in the early days of the early 1970s. But interestingly, some of the same kinds of issues are still present as they were 50 years ago. We came together as an association in 1973 because we were trying to fight excessive regulation. And the companies that formed CRN said, we understand that as an industry, if we're going to grow, there have to be some rules of the road. There have to be guardrails around the industry. But what's being proposed is way too restrictive. But we don't want to look at a world where it's anything goes and it's basically buyer beware. The industry will never grow if that's the impression consumers are left with. So they came together to form reasonable regulation. And to be backed by science and to be responsible. So those three tenets, sort of were there at the founding, and they are still just as much a part of our mission today. Be responsible, follow the science, and look for reasonable regulation, but don't go too far.
That's great. What are your guys' plans to celebrate this milestone?
So, it's a combination of looking backwards and looking forwards. Throughout the year, we're doing things, Throwback Thursdays, where we, remember highlights in our first 50 years, celebrate some of our former chairmen. But also, we're looking forward to what's the next 50 years look like. And so we're going to be doing strategic planning later this year, thinking about what does our next strategic plan look like. We've got a list of 8 policy priorities that we're advancing this year. So we're very serious about what we can do to further shape the industry going forward. And then, of course, we'll have a little bit of time just to do some celebration. Our annual conference is always in the fall, and that will sort of be the culmination of our anniversary year, and we'll have a big gala there to celebrate 50 years.
Awesome. That's great. Before I came over to the agency side, I worked at the Global Business Travel Association for years. And when I was there, we celebrated the 50th for them. And it was fun because myself and another of my coworkers, we literally went into the closet of history. And it was all of these photos from, conventions, 20 years past, and every picture of the board chairs for years and years and years. And it was just amazing to see how the association had changed, how the members had grown. It gives you a second to really look back and see how far you've come and what you've been able to accomplish.
And that's what we're finding too. Even things like, finding the original logo the association, with the one we're using today is not what we used in 1973. Finding little things like that. And, I've been making an effort to reach out to some of our former chairmen who are now retired to ask them about what they remember from their experience. So it really is kind of fun to see how far we've come.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know predictions are never easy in today's world, given everything that changes, but pulling your crystal ball out, what are your hopes for, the next 5, 10, or 50 years forward?
I think so much of that really depends upon our consumer base. Mm-hmm. And I'm very optimistic about what's happening to our consumer. If you look back in 1973, the typical dietary supplement consumer was a very niche market. Vitamins were not well understood. Herbals were not understood. Certainly, we didn't have anywhere near the levels of science we have today around things like probiotics and enzymes, and people's nutritional needs. Even what does it mean to be deficient? And there's a difference between being truly deficient in a nutrient, but there's also a space where you might not be deficient, but you're really not getting your optimal levels of a nutrient. So there's so much that we've learned over these 50 years. And as that has happened, the consumer base has grown. We do an annual survey every year at CRN of consumers, and we're up to now 3/4 of Americans say that they use a dietary supplement. Wow. So, when you've got 75% of the American consumers using your product, it's a very different space than it was when you might have had, 15% of consumers who said they used the supplement. And so as I look forward, I think that's just going to continue to grow. I mean, what we are seeing sort of as a long-term trend is consumers wanting to be more proactive in their health. Certainly there's more emphasis on well care and staying well rather than waiting until you get sick. So all of that I think is playing into consumers' desire to be more proactive around their health, and dietary supplements are well positioned to help consumers in that regard. So I think the industry is just going to continue to grow. I think that the science behind our products is going to get better and better. And we're trying to help that ourselves. We have our own research projects that are going forward to demonstrate benefit from the use of our products.
Wow, that's great. And it's interesting. I mean, we always talk about all the
the terrible things of the years of COVID and the things that went wrong and the things. But when you think about, maybe some silver linings, if you can call them that, I do think there is a much more presence in terms of health and wellness. And that was probably shifting before COVID too. But I do feel like coming out of that, people think more about, wellness as a whole in their lives and taking care of themselves and really just being healthy now.
Well, and we saw that in our own consumer surveys as well as in the sales data. I mean, obviously, the industry did get a spike in 2020 and 2021. So sales went up more than was projected. And not surprisingly, a lot of those were around general health and immune function, because I think people started to get really serious about what are little things that I can do. I mean, yes, I need to get vaccinated. I need to do the big things, but what are little things I can do to just boost my immunity and make sure that my body is well nourished so that if I get sick, I have less opportunity for it to, escalate very quickly. And so all that played into growing the industry and more consumer interest in our products. For us, it's important then that we do things as an industry that earn that trust every day. And we demonstrate that, yes, there is good science behind our products and we are doing all of the right things to make sure they are properly labeled. So we have to earn that trust. Even though we got a nice bump from COVID, it could also go away if we don't continually earn it.
Oh, that makes total sense. So when you talk about kind of those surveys you do, I mean, imagine, as you're talking about the shifting consumer sentiment and where they are, that's something you really have to be on the pulse of. Is that an in-house team you have? Do you use third-party surveys? How do you guys track that and handle that?
We use an outside polling firm. We use Ipsos because we know they're very well respected. Yeah. I mean, they do polling in lots of areas. So we know we're using a firm that will get attention when they release results. We just, as a matter of fact, issued a survey earlier this week where we were looking at how consumers use their flex spending accounts. Currently dietary supplements are not allowed generally for your flex spending accounts. You can buy over-the-counter medicine with them, and you can use them for co-pays and doctor visits and things like that. But you can't use them to buy your multivitamin to keep yourself healthy in the first place. And so we were asking consumers about how they use their flex spending accounts and their healthcare savings. Would they like that added flexibility to use their accounts for dietary supplements, and how would it affect their spending habits if that were the case? So, that we really rely on that consumer research to help inform our policy decisions.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a consumer myself, and I'm a mom, I have a 2-year-old, and her pediatrician just said we've got to get her on, Flintstone vitamins. And I was like, oh my God, I think I took those. But it's very comforting to hear you guys, are really bringing the industry together to make sure these supplements are backed by science, are safe. I mean, it just, it makes you feel better knowing that what we're giving our children is good for them, and what we're taking ourselves is good for us.
Well, as we look back kind of over at least the last 29 years of our history, there was a major piece of legislation passed in 1994 that really put this industry on the map. For the first time, it defined dietary supplements in statute. But ever since then, we have been battling this continuing myth that the industry is unregulated. And in fact, anyone in the industry knows that FDA is in our facilities. They're doing inspections. They're reviewing labels. There are many ways that we are a regulated industry. But that has been a recurring issue that CRN has dealt with now for 29 years, is trying to dispel that myth of the unregulated industry.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly goes to show, why your members value you, and that, you're taking on those key battles that they can't necessarily do on their own. I mean, that's a hard argument for a company that's selling the product to fight.
And I think that's really the role that trade association, another one that, that we can play. No company wants to have to spend their day, battling these industry-wide issues where, media gets it wrong or our critics get it wrong. And, you don't want to be the front line of that, battling the negative. But a trade association can do that because we can take the hits, and no single company has to take the hits. And I think, a lot of trade associations realize that often you have to be on the front line so that your members don't have to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, shifting gears a little. So, You've been with CRN for nearly 20 years now. And so I would love your perspective, especially for so many of our newer association leaders out there. How does that, change the way or influence the way you run the association?
Well, I think, first of all, just learning as much as you can about good management practices. Just because you're a nonprofit, doesn't mean that you're not looking to, make money every year, and that you don't need to be legally compliant with all of the things that associations have to do. Everything from, good business practices, getting an outside audit every year, having an independent auditor come in and look at your numbers, filing your 990 form with the IRS. Those sorts of things are just the price of entry, but they're very important. So making sure that you have a team that understands what's required. And then the next thing is, I guess, always being in tune with what your members want. It's funny. I've been now in the association world over 30 years, and I think I don't think many people grow up thinking, I really want to be a trade association executive. It's a great career, but it's not something that people probably aspire typically to do. And then they land the job and figure it out once they're there. But for me, it's understanding your members and remembering that they're paying your salary, they're keeping the lights on. And so it's never getting ahead of the membership. It's, constantly talking to your board members, making sure you understand what their priorities are. And so it becomes a combination of reflecting those things that are important to the members and delivering on them. And then in some ways, looking into your crystal ball and maybe looking at the industry as a whole, because you might see things that individual companies don't. And then making sure that you are pushing the industry in the direction to be well primed for whatever those things may be.
Yeah, that's so true. And it makes me laugh a little when you talk about the, not something you necessarily think of that, I'm going to go into trade associations or this will be the role. My first job out of college was at Consumer Technology Association. And I've been in the association world ever since till I switched over to the agency side recently. And I always joke, it took probably 2 years for me to finally explain to my parents and friends back home what associations did. And yes. So, it's just not something everyone knows. But then once you understand it, we say there's an association for everything, and it's because everything needs one. And it's there to, represent interests and to make sure we're all moving forward together.
Yes. And so, for me, that learning all of that, learning the management style that has to go with doing something collectively, right? Everything has to be done by consensus.
Yeah.
And I remind our junior staff people of that. We go into a board meeting and they say, well, I think we've got the majority vote here. So I think and I'm like, no, majorities are not enough in an association. That might be good for Congress. 51% majority, because they can get things done on 51%, and nobody is going to quit their position in Congress because they were on the losing side, right? But in an association, it really has to be by consensus. You want to be sure that you are moving things forward with, if not unanimity, at least an overwhelming majority of your members are on board. Because unlike Congress, they can leave tomorrow and go home. And,
right.
There's consequences to that if you lose members. So you want to be sure that you really understand what you can accomplish through consensus. You don't want that kind of divisiveness at the board level because it doesn't work. It will work in Congress. It doesn't work in association.
That's such great insight. Are there any other challenges like that where you've kind of, with your experience found different ways to tackle them, or just an understanding of how you have to handle things differently as an association leader?
Well, I'm an attorney by background, and they always teach you when you're taking a deposition is never to ask a question in a deposition that you don't know the answer to. I think association board meetings are a little similar to that, in that never put a question forward to the board that you don't already know what the vote is likely to be. So a lot of it is working the board in advance, understanding what their concerns are, where there are points of objection, and trying to find a solution to them or a carve out or something, so that by the time the motion comes to the floor of your board meeting, you've got consensus among your board. So that doesn't happen by accident. You've got to work it, and then know that by the time you bring it to a vote, that you're going to have a clear direction that this is where the industry wants to go.
Yeah, that's such a great point, and maybe some of the best advice we've had from our listeners on this podcast yet. So I appreciate that. I know we're coming up on time here, so I wanted to jump into our lightning round here, where we ask a few questions so our listeners can kind of get to know you. So the first one's real easy. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a very small town on the eastern shore of Maryland called Pocomoke. About 4,000 people, so really farm country.
Awesome. I actually have not heard of that. I'll have to look it up. So if you won the lottery tomorrow, would you still work?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's your favorite movie or TV show?
So I am a big fan of Ted Lasso. I'm really excited about the third season. I'm also really waiting for the second season of Severance. I find that to be a really interesting show about workplace.
Awesome. I'm with you on Ted Lasso. I love every second of that. I've got Severance on my list, though. Haven't seen that one yet. All right. Well, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Same here.
That's an easy one.
And our last one, what's something you missed from the pre-pandemic days?
I think I missed just the comfort of being in crowds and not having to think about, is somebody around me likely to get me sick? I guess it's, and maybe to some extent there was a little innocence or naivete about that, but I missed that. I think COVID really changed our thought processes for whether it's going to church, going to a conference, being at a trade show, or even being in an airport. Yeah. That's always in the back of my mind now. I liked the time when it was not in the back of my mind.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation, and we really appreciate having you on the A100.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Association 100 podcast, brought to you by the A100 publishing team, powered by Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications. You can subscribe to the Association 100 podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all of your favorite podcast listening apps so you'll never miss out. Or listen via our website at theassociation100.com. Follow us on Twitter at Association100. That's Association100 for all the latest insights and trends impacting the world of associations. Thanks for tuning in.